Picture the moment your next raise actually shows up. The paycheck lands a little heavier. Something in you relaxes, and a quiet voice says you have earned a slightly nicer apartment, a newer car, the upgrade you have been putting off for a year. You do not sit down and decide to spend more. It just happens. Within a few months, your whole life is quietly more expensive, and your bank account looks exactly like it did before the raise. There are 100 money rules out there, with budget apps and spreadsheets and systems stacked on systems. But one rule does the work of all of them, and almost nobody follows it. Just one. Learn it, and you stay financially stable for the rest of your life. Here is the rule, stated as plainly as it can be. Freeze your lifestyle. When your income goes up, your spending stays exactly where it is. Every raise, every bonus, every tax refund, every extra dollar from a side project flows straight past your life and into savings and investments. You decide once what your life costs to run, you set that level deliberately and a little lean, and then you lock it. Your income keeps climbing. Your cost of living does not move. And the space between those two lines gets wider every single year. That widening space is not a side effect of the rule. It is the entire point of it. You might be wondering why a channel about minimalist money would hang everything on a single idea. The reason is simple. Almost every other rule you have ever heard is really just a tactic in service of this one. Calculating what something truly costs to own. Refusing to replace things that still work. Decluttering the stuff that quietly drains you. Knowing your number and defending it. Walking past the entry-level luxury trap without slowing down. All of that exists for one purpose, which is to keep your standard of living from rising to swallow your income. Get the freeze right, and you do not need the rest as a checklist, because the math starts working on your behalf without you thinking about it. That is what a foundational rule is. It is the one habit that makes a dozen other habits automatic. So let me convince you that the gap is the whole game, because this is the idea everything else rests on. Conversations about money almost always obsess over the income line. Earn more, get the promotion, start the side hustle, negotiate harder at review time. Income matters. Of course it does. But income alone has never made anyone stable, and the data on this is honestly a little uncomfortable. As of this spring, the personal saving rate in the United States sat at roughly 2.5% of disposable income, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. 2.5 cents saved out of every dollar that arrives after taxes. Earlier in the year, it was hovering closer to 4.5%, and the trend has been drifting down, not up. Now hold that next to the past. For most of modern history, the saving rate in this country averaged north of 8%. Back in the 1970s, households routinely set aside more than 12% of what they took home. So here is the part worth sitting with. We are not earning less than those households did. In real terms, the average American earns more. We are simply letting our spending rise to meet every dollar that arrives, and then a little beyond it. The income went up while the saving quietly went down. The only thing that changed was the relationship between the two lines, and that relationship is the one thing inside your control. It helps to picture it as two lines drawn on a simple chart. The first line is your income, and for working people it usually climbs gradually, year after year, in small upward steps. The second line is your spending. For the average household, that second line tracks the first one almost perfectly, rising right alongside it, sometimes a hair above it. Two lines moving up together, locked at the hip, never separating. That is a financial life with no gap, and it can look completely successful from the outside while offering almost no security underneath. The freeze does exactly one thing to that chart, and it is the only thing that matters. It takes the spending line and lays it flat. The income line keeps climbing. The spending line holds steady. And the space that opens up between them, that growing wedge of daylight, is your wealth, your safety, and eventually your freedom. Everything in this video is really just a method for prying those two lines apart and keeping them apart on purpose. Let me be precise about what stability even is, because the word gets thrown around loosely. Stability is not a number in your head. It is not the warm feeling you get after a good month. Stability is structural, and it lives in the distance between what lands in your account and what leaves it. Someone who earns a fortune and spends all of it is one bad quarter away from panic, no matter how the life looks from outside. Someone who earns a modest income and keeps a wide, permanent gap between earning and spending can absorb a layoff, a surprise medical bill, a dead transmission, a slow season at work, and barely change their breathing. The gap is the shock absorber. The gap is the runway. Everything else you own is just decoration sitting on top of it. Now think about how the opposite of the rule actually operates, because the mechanics are sneaky. Lifestyle does not creep upward in dramatic leaps that you would notice and resist. It ratchets, one click at a time. A raise comes through, and you upgrade exactly one thing, maybe a nicer grocery habit, or a streaming service you keep forgetting to cancel, or a slightly bigger apartment when the lease renews, because you can finally afford it. None of it feels reckless in the moment. Each individual step feels reasonable, even earned, even healthy. The trouble is that a ratchet only turns one direction. Try to reverse it later, and your nervous system treats the cutback as a loss, even though 6 months earlier you lived without that thing entirely and felt completely fine. This is a documented quirk of human wiring, and it has a name. Psychologists call it hedonic adaptation. The first week with the upgrade feels great. By the second month, it has become your new normal, the baseline you measure everything against. And the lift it gave you has quietly evaporated. So you reach for the next upgrade to feel that lift again, and the floor rises once more. This is the exact reason people who get steady raises so often feel just as stretched at a high income as they did at a low one. The raise arrived, the ratchet clicked into its next position, and the adaptation did the rest. And the gap, the thing that actually buys security, never opened at all. The freeze works because it refuses to let that ratchet turn in the first place. Here is what makes the freeze quietly devastating in the best possible way. The average pay raise budget for American companies in 2026 is sitting at about 3.5%, according to surveys from firms like WTW, the Conference Board, and Mercer. 3.5% does not sound like much. If you spend it, you will barely register it, and within a year, you will be right back to feeling stretched, wondering where the raise went. But if you freeze your lifestyle and route that 3.5% into investments instead, it stops being a faint, forgettable bump and becomes the seed of something that grows on its own. The person who spends the raise gets a lift that fades in a month. The person who banks it is quietly assembling a machine that will eventually out-earn them. Let me show you that machine through a real person. Call her Bianca. Bianca takes home about $60,000 a year, and she decides her life runs comfortably at that level, so she freezes it right there. She is not living in a bare room eating plain rice in the dark. There is a decent apartment, a trip once a year, dinners out whenever she feels like it. What she does instead is draw a clear line at what her life costs, and refuse to let that line move just because her income did. Every year, she gets a raise of around 3.5%, and every year that entire raise goes straight into a low-cost index fund, the kind that owns a sliver of the whole market, where the long-run return after inflation has historically landed somewhere near 7%. Now watch what the gap does over time, because this is the part that feels almost unfair once you see it. In the early years, it is unremarkable, and honestly, a little boring. A couple $1,000s banked the first year. a bit more the next. Nothing to post about. If Bianca were impatient, this is exactly where she would quit, because for a long stretch, it looks like nothing is happening. But underneath the boredom, two engines are spinning up at once. Her raises are compounding on a steadily larger salary, and her investments are compounding on themselves, and the two effects begin to feed each other. The curve that looked flat for years suddenly starts to bend upward, and then it bends harder. By her 10th year of doing nothing cleverer than refusing to spend her raises, Bianca is sitting on roughly $160,000. By year 20, the account has pushed past $800,000, and somewhere around her 21st year of quietly holding her lifestyle flat, Bianca crosses $1 million. She never picked a hot stock or tried to time the market. She did not even raise the percentage she was saving, the way every finance guru tells you to. All she did was stop letting her life get more expensive, and then let time and patience do the heavy lifting that willpower never could. Before you decide that is some fantasy that only works for a robot who lives like a monk for 2 decades, let me hand you the cautious version of the very same story. Suppose Bianca is a normal human being who wants her life to slowly get a little nicer. So she lets her baseline drift upward, gently, around 3% a year, roughly in step with the cost of living, which means her actual standard of living improves over time. She only banks the slice of each raise that beats inflation. Even in that softer, far more human version of the rule, she still sails past $500,000 inside of 30 years. The strict freeze is the ceiling. The gentle freeze is the floor. Both of them land somewhere that most earners on her salary never get within sight of, and the only variable that ever changed was her relationship with her own raises. Now I want to walk into the part of spending that almost nobody ever calculates, because it is the reason the freeze matters even more than those headline numbers suggest. When you buy something, the price on the tag is rarely the real cost. The real cost is everything that purchase quietly commits you to afterward. A bigger apartment is not just a higher rent figure on a lease. It is more space to heat in winter and cool in summer, more rooms to furnish, more square footage begging to be filled with objects, more time and money spent cleaning and maintaining all of it. A nicer car is not just a bigger monthly payment. It is steeper insurance, premium fuel instead of regular, costlier repairs, pricier parts, higher registration. Every upgrade does not simply spend money one time. It raises the permanent, recurring cost of merely existing, and it keeps charging you that higher rate every month until you actively reverse the decision. Let me make that concrete with something almost everyone does without a second thought. Take a phone. The common pattern is to replace a perfectly functional phone every 2 or 3 years simply because a newer model exists, usually for something close to $1,000 each time. It feels harmless. It is one purchase, occasionally, and the phone is something you use all day. But run that single habit across 30 years and invest the difference instead of spending it, and you are looking at close to $30,000 of lost wealth from one small, automatic, barely noticed upgrade reflex. One habit. $30,000. The same logic scales up to the largest purchase in your life, and that is where it bites hardest. Imagine choosing a home that costs a few $100s more each month than the one that would have served you perfectly well. The bigger payment is only the opening line of the story. A larger home means a larger property tax bill every year, higher insurance, more to heat and cool through every season, more repairs because there is simply more house to break, and a strong gravitational pull to fill all those extra rooms with furniture you did not need yesterday. Add it all together, and the genuinely larger home can quietly cost you many thousands of extra dollars, not once, but every single year you live in it. Invest that yearly difference at 7% instead across the decades of a mortgage, and the gap between the modest home and the impressive one is not a few nice rooms. It is a second fortune you handed away one comfortable month at a time. The house you can easily afford is rarely the house that keeps you stable. Now widen the lens. Apply that same reflex to cars traded in every few years, to furniture swapped because you grew bored of it, to gadgets and wardrobes and the slow drip of subscriptions you forgot you were paying for. Each of those upgrades carries its own recurring tale of cost, and together they form a tax on your future that you never voted. This is exactly why people with genuinely high incomes so often have so little to show for it. They are not foolish, and they are not reckless in any obvious way. They simply never counted the recurring cost of constantly upgrading, and the recurring cost is the precise place where the wealth quietly leaks out of their life. Which brings me to the other side of Bianca, a coworker we will call Theo. Theo earns more than she does. He always has. He landed the bigger title and the bigger paycheck early, and from the outside, he looks like the one who is clearly winning. But Theo never froze a single thing. Every raise turned into a slightly upgraded version of the life he already had. A larger place the moment he could swing it, a leased car with a badge on the hood, and a payment to match. The watch, the trips, the constant low hum of small upgrades that each felt completely earned. Theo is not lazy, and he is not stupid. He is the hardest working person in that office. And he is also 2 missed paychecks away from a genuine crisis, because his expensive life now requires every dollar his impressive income produces just to keep the lights on. Here is the cruel little twist buried in Theo's story. The more he earns, the less free he becomes. Every upgrade raises his monthly nut, which means he now needs that high salary just to stand. He cannot take the lower paying job he would actually love waking up for. Walking away from a manager who treats him badly is off the table too. So is taking a year to retrain, or to start the thing he has quietly dreamed about for a decade. His lifestyle has slowly hardened into a cage with a very nice view from inside it. Bianca, earning noticeably less on paper, could do any of those things tomorrow morning, because her life is cheap to run and her gap is wide and deep. That right there is the difference between looking rich and being stable, and it almost never shows up on the outside where other people can see it. Picture the moment it became real for Theo. A smaller company reached out with the kind of work he had always said he wanted, the sort of role he would have leapt at in his 20s. The catch was that it paid noticeably less, at least at first, with a real shot at much more down the road. Bianca, sitting one desk over on a smaller salary, could have said yes to an offer like that without losing a single night of sleep, because her life barely costs anything to run and her cushion is deep. Theo could not even seriously consider it. His mortgage, his car lease, his fixed monthly obligations had all been quietly calibrated to a paycheck he no longer felt free to risk. He had built a life that demanded his current income just to survive, and so the door to the work he actually wanted was bolted shut from the inside by his own past purchases. He turned the offer down and told everyone it simply was not the right time. The truth was quieter and harder to say out loud. He could not afford his own dreams, because he had already spent the money on a lifestyle he barely remembered choosing. So where do the frozen dollars actually go? This matters enormously, because freezing your lifestyle only builds real wealth if the surplus you free up lands somewhere that works for you. The first stop for money you might need in the near future is a high-yield savings account. Right now, the strong ones are paying somewhere around 4% a year. To feel what that means, picture $10,000 sitting in one of them, earning about $400 a year just for existing, while you sleep, while you work, while you do nothing at all. Now compare that to one of the giant national banks, where the savings rate is frequently 1/100%. That same $10,000 earns about $1 a year sitting there, not $100, one single dollar. And the national average across all banks is only around 1/3%, so a great many people are quietly leaving real money on the table simply by keeping their cash wherever their checking account happens to live. If this is landing for you, take 2 seconds and tap subscribe, because I break down one of these money ideas every single week. And the next few are some of my favorites. All right, back to it. Your emergency cushion belongs in that high-yield account, usually several months of expenses, sitting there boring and safe and instantly available. But the long-term surplus, the money you will not need to touch for many years, belongs somewhere with more room to grow. That somewhere is low-cost, broad index funds, the kind that simply own a slice of the entire market rather than betting on any single company. Over its long history, the United States stock market has returned somewhere around 10% a year before inflation, and closer to 7% a year after inflation takes its share. There will be ugly years inside that average, years the market falls hard and the headlines scream. But the patient investor who keeps feeding the surplus in and refuses to sell in a panic has historically captured that long-run return. And there is a simple piece of arithmetic worth carrying in your head for the rest of your life. It is sometimes called the Rule of 72. Divide the number 72 by your expected yearly return, and the answer is roughly how many years it takes your money to double. At 7%, your money doubles about every 10 years, with no extra effort, no extra deposits, nothing required from you but patience. So a frozen lifestyle that feeds a steady surplus into the market is really a doubling machine in disguise. The dollars you refuse to spend on a newer phone do not just sit there. They double, and then they double again, and the gap you opened by holding your life flat keeps compounding long after you have forgotten the upgrade you skipped. There is a built-in advantage waiting for nearly everyone here too, and it is one the spender almost never gets to use. In 2026, you can put up to $24,500 into a workplace retirement plan and another $7,500 into an individual retirement account, with the growth sheltered from taxes along the way. Those are generous buckets. The person who froze their lifestyle has the surplus sitting right there, ready to fill them. The person whose spending rose to meet every raise never has anything left over to put inside them year after year, so the tax advantage might as well not exist for them at all. Same opportunity, handed to both of them equally. Completely opposite outcomes. And the only thing that differed, upstream of all of it, was the freeze. It is worth naming the moments when this rule actually gets tested, because they rarely arrive looking like temptation. They arrive looking like good news. A year-end bonus drops into your account. A tax refund shows up in the spring, larger than you expected. An old relative leaves you something. A side project finally pays out after months of nothing. Every one of those windfalls shows up wearing the disguise of a reward, whispering that you have earned a little celebration, a small upgrade, a treat to mark the occasion. That whisper is precisely the ratchet, reaching for its next click. The person who follows the rule treats every windfall the same calm way they treat a raise. It flows past the lifestyle and into the gap almost on reflex before the celebration story can get its hooks in. This does not mean you can never enjoy a good thing in your life. It means the default direction for unexpected money points toward your freedom rather than toward a higher baseline, and you set that default once, in advance, while you are thinking clearly, instead of deciding in the warm rush of the moment when the money is practically burning a hole in your pocket. Handle the windfalls well, and the ordinary months tend to take care of themselves. All right, let me get practical, because a rule you cannot actually execute is just a pleasant idea you will forget by dinner. Freezing your lifestyle comes down to 3 concrete moves, and the first is to define your number. Sit down and figure out what your life genuinely costs to run at a level that makes you content. Not the level you imagine you should be performing for other people, and not the level the algorithm keeps suggesting to you. Add up the rent or the mortgage, the food, the transportation, the insurance, the basics that keep your life functioning, plus a reasonable amount for the things that bring you real joy. That total is your baseline. That is the line. Write it down somewhere you will see it, because a line you have named is a line you can actually defend. The second move is to automate the surplus before you ever lay eyes on it. This is the step that quietly makes the whole rule work, because it removes willpower from the equation entirely. The day a raise or a bonus hits your pay, the increase should already be routed automatically into your investments before it ever touches your checking account, before your brain ever gets the chance to file it under spendable. Money you never see is money you never adapt to, and money you never adapt to never becomes a lifestyle you have to maintain. Pay your future self first on autopilot in the background and simply live on what remains. Set it up once, and the rule keeps running itself for years while you barely think about it. The third move is the smallest, and it might be the most useful of all. Whenever you feel that familiar pull to upgrade something that already works perfectly well, give it 1 week. Not forever, just 7 days. Write down the thing you want, write down what it would cost not only to buy, but to keep running, and then go live your ordinary life for a week. Most of the time, the urge simply dissolves on its own, because it was never really about the object in the first place. It was about a long day, a clever advertisement, a comparison with someone online, a mood that needed soothing. The 1 week pause does not make you feel deprived of anything. It just quietly moves the decision out of the hands of your impulse and into the hands of your judgment. And your judgment is the part of you that actually wants to be free. Now let me deal with the objection that is probably forming right about now, because it is a fair one and it deserves a real answer. All of this can sound like a life of grim denial. Saying no to everything. Watching other people enjoy themselves while you sit there pinching every last penny and counting cents. That is not what this is, and the distinction is the whole heart of the matter. Freezing your lifestyle is not about spending as little as a human can possibly survive on. It is about deciding, on purpose and in advance, what is genuinely enough for you, and then refusing to let an endless escalator of upgrades quietly drag that number higher every year of your life. Enough is not deprivation. Enough is quite possibly the most underrated word in all of personal finance, because the person who actually knows they're enough is the only person who can ever truly arrive somewhere and rest. Everyone still chasing more is standing on a moving walkway that speeds up a little faster every time they earn a little more. None of this is easy, and it is worth being honest about why. You are surrounded during nearly every waking hour by a culture engineered to turn that ratchet for you. Advertising exists to make your current life feel slightly insufficient. The feeds you scroll serve up an endless highlight reel of other people's upgrades, their kitchens, their cars, their vacations, all carefully framed and quietly financed by debt you will never see behind the photo. The entire machine runs on the exact opposite of this rule. It needs your spending line to keep chasing your income line forever, because that chase is precisely where its profit comes from. So holding your lifestyle flat is a genuinely countercultural act, make no mistake about it. Choosing to keep your life steady while everyone around you appears to be leveling up will, at moments, feel strange, even a little lonely. But hold on to what you can see that they cannot. You can see where the escalator actually leads. You understand that the impressive feed often sits on a hidden foundation of fear and obligation. And you have decided, with your eyes wide open, to build the quieter thing that genuinely lasts, the gap that no advertisement and no algorithm can ever talk you back out of. And here is something that should give you hope. Because the rule does not only work if you happen to start in your 20s with a clean slate and 40 years ahead of you. Let me give you one more person, because I think she matters the most of the three. Call her Camille. Camille did not stumble onto any of this until her early 40s. She had spent 2 solid decades letting her lifestyle climb right alongside every raise, and she had almost nothing saved to show for what had been, by any measure, a good and successful career. When it finally clicked for her, she did not torch her life or move into a tiny room in shame. She did something far quieter. She froze her spending exactly where it already was, refused to let it rise another inch, and funneled every future raise and bonus straight into investments from that day forward. Camille did not have 40 years left for the magic to compound. She had maybe 20. But 20 years of a frozen lifestyle and a steadily widening gap still rebuilt her into a woman with real security and real options, with time to spare before any of it would matter most. She will tell you the hardest part was not the money at all. The hardest part was the first year, when freezing felt like loss before it slowly turned into pride. The rule has no minimum age and no expiration date printed on it. It asks only one thing of you, which is that you begin the freeze now, today, instead of promising yourself you will start it next year, the way you did last year. Here is what genuinely happens to a person who holds that line long enough. The freeze stops feeling like restraint and slowly becomes a part of who they are. In the beginning, it takes real effort to let a raise pass through untouched, to watch a coworker buy the new thing and feel that small tug of wanting. But after a while, watching your own gap widen becomes its own quiet, durable satisfaction, one that outlasts any purchase you could have made instead. You stop measuring yourself against the upgrades other people are parading, because by now you can see exactly where those upgrades lead, and you know that road does not end at freedom. The number in your account keeps climbing. The doublings keep arriving, roughly every decade, like clockwork. And one ordinary morning you realize you have quietly crossed the line from working because you have no choice into working because you choose to. That, in the end, is the entire prize. Not a tall pile of money sitting there for its own sake, gathering dust and bragging rights. A life that no longer needs your fear in order to keep running. A life with margin, with options, with the ability to say yes to the right things and no to the wrong ones without your stomach dropping. The freeze buys you that, slowly and then all at once, and it asks for almost nothing in return except that you stop letting your spending chase your income up the ladder. So that is the one rule, the single discipline that quietly does the work of all the others. Freeze your lifestyle, bank every raise, and let the gap between what you earn and what you spend widen for the rest of your life. It replaces budgets you would never stick to, and willpower you would eventually run out of, and complicated systems you would abandon by February. Because once it is running, the math simply works in your favor and never stops. Bianca showed you what it patiently builds. Theo showed you the cage that waits for everyone who skips it. Camille proved it is never, ever too late to begin. But I owe you one honest thing before you go, and it is important. This rule is the engine, and every engine needs a solid foundation underneath it to push against. If the basics beneath your money are shaky, if you are not yet sure how interest truly works, how debt compounds against you, in the exact same relentless way that investing compounds for you. How the accounts and the tax shelters and the order of operations actually fit together. Then even a perfect rule ends up sitting on sand. The people who freeze their lifestyle and still somehow get nowhere are almost always missing that base layer, the plain fundamentals that nobody ever bothered to sit them down and teach. I made a full video that walks through exactly that foundation, the financial literacy groundwork that every single thing in this video is quietly standing on top of. If you want the freeze to actually hold and the gap to actually grow, that foundation is where the real journey begins, and where most of the expensive mistakes get quietly avoided long before they ever have a chance to happen. It is the most useful next step you could take today, and it is waiting for you right now.